History is rarely a straight line. It is a series of collisions. For the Fon people, the founders of the kingdom of Dahomey, the collision began in a cluster of villages called Tado, in what we now know as Togo. Driven by a succession dispute in the kingdom of Alada around 1610, the losing party migrated 60 miles inland to the Abomey Plateau. But peace was a phantom. By the early 1620s, another dispute erupted. From the dust of this conflict, a leader named Dako emerged victorious. Dako was the architect of a dynasty, a man whose hunger for land led him to annex every neighboring village within his reach. Yet it was his son, Wegbaja, ruling from 1640 to 1680, who transformed a settlement into a superpower. Wegbaja did not just build a capital, he built a statement. Legend tells us that Wegbaja slew a local chieftain named Dan, and in a move of chilling symbolic dominance, built his royal palace directly over Dan's grave. He named it Dahomey, in the belly of Dan. Every king who followed Wegbaja would rule from that belly. The state was no longer just a territory. It was a predator, and a predator requires a sting. That sting was the Ahosi.
The origin of the women's army is as cloudy as the early Dahomean mornings, but the first records appear during the reign of Wegbaja. They were not yet soldiers of the line. They were the Gbeto, the king's elephant hunters. Imagine the savannah. An elephant, 5 tons of muscle and ivory, stands grazing. From the tall grass, a figure emerges. She wears a headgear adorned with horns, mimicking the profile of a harmless antelope. She moves with a silence that defies her sturdy frame. This was the Gbeto's art. They hunted to provide ivory for the king's trade and meat for the grand royal festivals. But as Dahomey became a warring state, the strain on the male population became unsustainable. The king looked at the Gbeto, women who already possessed the nerves to stare down a charging bull elephant, and saw his elite guard. By the time King Gezo took the throne, these women were the Mino, our mothers. To the Europeans, they were Amazons, a term lifted from Greek myth, but the reality was far more complex. Legally, every warrior was an Ahosi, a wife of the king. They were physically formidable, a phenotype that marveled European diplomats like Richard Burton. Burton observed that in the Fawn race, women were the working sex, the plowboys, the porters, the market cattle. In his words, why should they not also be soldiers? How did a girl find herself inside the red walls of the palace? It was a clinical, bureaucratic harvest. Every 3 years, a male court official called the Kpakpa moved through the kingdom like a ghost. The Kpakpa carried bags of pebbles. This was the Pebble Census. For every soul in a household, a pebble was moved, giving the king a precise map of his human resources. The Kpakpa was not just counting, he was selecting. The most beautiful and physically endowed were reserved for the king's private quarters. The robust, sturdy girls were earmarked for the guard. The daughters of slaves became palace laborers. But the selection was also a tool of social control. Wealthy chiefs presented their daughters as tributes to buy royal favor. Badly behaved or immoral wives were sent to the palace as a punishment from which they could never be reclaimed. Captives of war, their homes sacked by the very army they were about to join, were folded into the ranks. But for the native Fawn, becoming an Ahosi was a gut-wrenching sacrifice. Fawn culture was centered on procreation and sexual ecstasy. They practiced the elongation of the clitoris and cicatrization, intricate raised cuts on the inner thighs, shoulders, and neck. These were not just decorations, they were maps of pleasure, rubbed with traditional concoctions to ensure the formation of keloids that heightened sensation. To be an Ahosi was to have those maps erased. They were bound to a life of celibacy. In a state that legalized and taxed prostitution to ensure male satisfaction, the Ahosi were forbidden from the very pleasures their culture celebrated. The penalty for a defiled warrior was execution for both her and her partner. This fear was reinforced by the belief that the deity of chastity would strike the unfaithful with bowel diseases. The psychological weight was so immense that many women confessed to their sins even when their secrets were safe, choosing a quick death over a divine curse. When they were not at war, the Ahosi lived in the Singboji, the two-story buildings. These palaces in Abomey, Kana, and Alada were massive, square compounds enclosed by red laterite mud walls. The scale was staggering. The walls were up to 33 feet high and 8 feet thick at the base, stretching for miles. To walk the perimeter was to walk nearly 3 miles of hardened mud, topped with wooden and iron stakes holding the sun-bleached skulls of the king's enemies. Inside, these were towns within towns, housing 20,000 residents, bards, historians, eunuchs, and the Ahosi. Men were forbidden from entering. The only exceptions were the Tononu and the Kangbode. The Tononu was the chief eunuch, the second most powerful figure in the kingdom, whose influence was total within the palace walls. The Kangbode was the king's forerunner, clearing his path of sticks and stones. But the genius of the Dahomean system was its dualism. Every male official had a female counterpart. The Mino were not just soldiers, they were the mothers of the state. They were highly revered, receiving preferential treatment over any civilian woman. Outside the palace, a fawn woman was submissive. She would kneel to serve her husband and never look him in the eye. But an Ahosi? When she left the palace, she was preceded by a slave girl ringing a bell. At that sound, every man had to move away, look at the ground, and maintain a respectful distance. To watch an Ahosi pass was a crime. To touch one was a death sentence. Within the palace, the Ahosi were the masters. They did no chores. They had their own girl slaves who served as their stewardesses, spies, and shadows on the battlefield.
The Ahosi were as ornamental as they were lethal. Their parade dresses were dazzling, but their battle dress was designed for the grim reality of the bush, gloomy, dark colors that blended into the landscape. They were draped in ornaments, bracelets and armlets of silver, copper, coral, and ivory. They wore charms sewn into their clothes and decorated their weapons with the same spiritual protection. Their primary firearms were imported from Europe: smooth-bore, flintlock muskets, carbines, and blunderbusses. They even manned cannons. But the gun was often a prelude. The Ahosi lived and died by the short work. They carried daggers and broad-curved, single-edged swords up to 20 inches long, but their most terrifying weapon was a specialized folding blade reserved for enemy royalty. It weighed 20 pounds and measured up to 30 inches long. When swung with both hands, it could shear through bone as easily as dry grass. Every soldier, male or female, went into battle with a simple kit: a small grass rope for tying a captive's neck and a piece of chalk. When a warrior captured an enemy, they used the chalk to mark their personal sign on the captive's back, a literal receipt for their bravery. By the peak of the 19th century, this force of 6,000 women was the most feared military unit in West Africa.
The decline of the belly of Dan was not sudden. It was a slow strangulation. As the mid-19th century approached, the British Royal Navy placed a blockade on the coast, demanding an end to the slave trade. For Dahomey, this was an existential crisis. The slave trade was the engine of their economy, providing the rifles they needed to survive. King Gezo tried to transition to legitimate trade, palm oil, and agricultural exports, but the transition was chaotic. Internal struggles and power vacuums weakened the kingdom. In a major blow, the neighboring city-state of Abeokuta defeated the Dahomean army in a field battle. Then came the French. In 1894, after 2 brutal wars, the French Foreign Legion, equipped with Gatling guns and modern artillery, shattered the Ahosi lines. The women charged the bayonets with their 20-pound blades, but courage could not defeat cordite. 2/3 of the Mino were killed in action. The kingdom was formally incorporated into French West Africa. The Singboji fell silent. The Ahosi were disbanded. Some struggled to find a place in a world that now demanded they be traditional women again. In 1978, a historian met a woman named Nawi. She was over 100 years old. She claimed to have fought the French nearly a century prior. When she died in 1979, the last mother of Dahomey passed into legend. They were a challenge to everything the world thought it knew about gender and power. They were warriors, wives, hunters, and icons. They lived in the belly of Dan, and they died to ensure that the name of Dahomey would never be forgotten.
The history of the Ahosi is a reminder that the past is never simple. It is a story of liberation through subservience and power through sacrifice. The ancestors have spoken, and this scroll is now closed. But the journey of discovery never truly ends. If the history we unraveled today awakened something within you, leave your mark. Hit the like button, share this knowledge with a fellow seeker, and subscribe to join our growing archive. What part of Dahomey resonated with your spirit? Let me know down in the comments. Until the next scroll is unrolled, walk with the strength of the past and the light of the future.